Hello, welcome to day 112 of 365 days towards racial change. My name is Tomlins Nyback. Today we're going to do a little bit different because there's a lot of material here. We're still in our series on the signers of the Declaration of Independence, moving right along, but I stumbled onto some interesting facts and like I say, I'm coming out of Wikipedia. I'm not doing any in-depth uh, research here, although Wikipedia is a valid site for information, definitely a good start. But stumbled onto some information about one of the signers that I think is very important to our ongoing argument uh, about Black life in America, what we are, what's going on, reparations, slavery, history, economics, and all that. So I'm going to skip the standard introduction. You see hashtag us too. Check them out behind me and stuff like that. Dr. Claude Anderson is my motivation as far as the um, racial understanding, uh, racial and slavery, literacy, history, things like that. For an economic angle as well. I would cite Robert Kiyosaki if depending on how far I get into this. I've got some personal things coming up in my life with going back to school and stuff like that. But he's another one of my mentors and stuff like that. So you get my story if you look at 111 past videos. You could piece that together. But we're going to get rid of that today and get right into it because I want to talk about some specific things today. Did you know, like, if you could be searching for the most impossible thing, something that's never happened before, things that men have never seen. I'll give you two examples that just popped into my mind very quickly. I'm a bit of an amateur astronomer. And I believe, like, there was an astronomer that looked at the spacing of the planets away from the sun, and there's a ratio. As you get further out, the orbits get wider and wider. Well, as he was doing that, he found out he was missing a planet in all this. And planets take a long time to go around the sun. We use the Earth as the standard upon which we base all the other orbits. So we say the Earth, we call that a whole year around the sun, 365 days, roughly. It's not exact, but then as we get further out, planets take longer to make their orbit, hundreds of years, some of them. Well, so this guy with these ratios, he said, we're missing a planet. So he did calculations. He said, there's supposed to be a planet here, and sure enough, he kept observing, and as time went on, of this planet, I believe it was Neptune, came into view. Pretty sure it was Neptune. Second, if you have a biblical mind, you think about Genesis, the beginnings, not just the creation of the world, man, but take the story of Noah. He says it's going to rain, and he's building this vessel on land because it's going to rain. Do you know how ridiculous that must have appeared to his contemporaries at the time? It's this monstrous vessel collecting animals. Took them roughly 120 years to build. Right? It's never rained. So what are they talking about? I say that to say I stumbled onto some interesting stuff that kind of validates something I've been saying a little bit in the past. Let's get right to these signers of the Declaration of Independence, and you'll see what I'm saying. First up is George Ross. Not a whole lot about George Ross here, Pennsylvania representative, born 1730, died 1779. I think that's in the midst of the American Revolution. A couple of these guys did die during the Revolution. He reached the bar in Pennsylvania at the age of 20. He had a sister named Gertrude that married George Read. And that says something, I'm finding a lot of this, and it's not a big surprise, but the men, their sisters, and their families kind of married, intermarried. It was just that kind of circle, social circle, in which they traveled. So it's natural that they would find affections towards one another and marry one another at different degrees and different stages as different alliances and things. It was like Senator, would you like to come over? Some of these women, some of their husbands, politicians, wealthy men died or something happened. I don't see a lot of divorce language, not like that. Till death do you part was very real back then. Mortality and stuff like that. So somebody died, and then another potential suitor came into the picture. So I just mentioned that, I'm finding that consistently in the research. So a lot of marrying and families joining one another. The genesis of the nation, just married like that. So it was a community, close-knit community, wealthy, even if they weren't superstars or rock stars like Benjamin Franklin and some of these other guys, they still had that, had some money. They weren't blue-collar Joes like me that, walked to Philadelphia to make this happen. They rode horses. They had lands, plantations, slaves, many of them, or their businesses were thriving, or they were successful lawyers or physicians, things like that. He also is noted for negotiating with the Northwest Indians. Up to that point, he probably didn't have a whole lot going on beyond the Appalachians too early. Ohio figures in to the conversation often, Western Kentucky, Western Virginia, places like that, but not much beyond the Appalachians are going on. So, the Northwest Indians, I'm guessing they mean Northwest Pennsylvania, into Ohio, a little bit into Canada there, trying to, keep the peace as our nation's doing its best to grow. His father was Anglican, and Anglicans were connected with the Church of England, and he, not a whole lot of slave commentary in Wikipedia, so I just have him abstaining from the slave issues. Very, very busy, especially if he's negotiating with Northwest Indians and interacting with the bar in Pennsylvania, like many of his contemporaries signing the Declaration of Independence. He has an extensive resume in politics. Go check it out. That's George Ross. Now, here's the guy. Staying on George Ross for just another moment here. I want to talk about Tory politics, and this is from England, from the homeland. Their Tory politics, the Tory politicians, a Tory loyalist. These are the people that go God, King, Country. If you've been around any length of time on the planet, you can associate God, King, Country with England. They say a cheer, God save the Queen, God, King, Country, those phrases. And So he was actually, pretty much a loyalist, and we find many loyalists here or loyalist adherents moving towards getting their minds changed. They wouldn't violate their consciousness or their integrity and vote against that. So when he signed the Declaration of Independence, he was fully on the side of the patriots, and he had to dismiss his relationship with Tory politics. All right, God, King, Country. And that's his story. Benjamin Rush. This is a guy. For some reason, I feel like I've heard the name in association with the Declaration of Independence. I got a lot here to go through. Some important points I want to make. The brief notes are available to you. They're in the description of this video. All the videos have brief notes. There's no discrepancy, but the video elaborates maybe where the notes miss, and the notes further expand on what I may miss in the videos. Something to think about. Benjamin Rush, born 1746, died 1813. He was a reformer, physician, abolitionist. He was one of these thinking guys, very cerebral guy I could probably hang out with. Not a whole lot of conversation, just information on your politics. I would challenge him on his angles, his beliefs. He would ask me for advice. I would just listen. He'd come to his own conclusion and step off. That kind of thing. Would I believe? Princeton educated. He had a medical practice, taught chemistry in Philadelphia. He's consulted Thomas Paine on Thomas Paine's pamphlet, Common Sense. Again, he's a guy that's going to challenge your argument respectfully and all that, and agree to disagree and all that. So he gave Thomas Paine probably some angles, some things to think about in writing Common Sense. He was a Surgeon General of the Revolutionary Army, American Revolutionary Army. Critical of George Washington. Big mistake to be, well, not a mistake, but you better have some political guts and balls to talk about the hero, the top man, the man being groomed to head the nation after this mess, this little war inconvenience gets out of the way. I'm sure George Washington had made a name for himself even before he led armies and stuff like that. So you got to know what you know before you talk about the top guy. Today, bringing it up into 2019, Mitt Romney is speaking out against Donald Trump, and so you got to. We already expect the Democrats to say stuff and all that. We're not worried about that, but Mitt Romney's in the same house now, in the same space, political space as the president, and he's rambling and firing off on the president. So but Mitt's got, Mitt's wealthy, these two wealthy guys jawing at each other, it's interesting. So that's the same thing going on between Benjamin Rush and George Washington. But they both have a common denominator in being active at seeing America prosper, the colonies free. They're firing, their weapons are pointing in the same direction. Just a little bit of disagreement, infighting going on there. He was Also, one of the guys he's listed as hearing kind of the foot soldiers' complaints, which, I did a little military service, and it's, military is good. They do their best uh, to have some treatment, but, there's a difference between the guy eating hardtack or some kind of meal. When I say meal, I mean like some grains quickly thrown together just to get the belly, calm the belly down. There's nothing like when you're hungry. That's a tough thing to dismiss or ignore. But when your superiors, you're probably eating beef and chickens and fat potatoes, and, whatnot. You know, uh, so that was part of the complaints Benjamin Rush heard, and him being a medical guy, so but medicine hadn't gone too far yet. So if you get hit, and if they can't get the bullet out or whatever, then here comes the saws and amputations. Boy, they must have just been butchering guys back then. Boy, you just didn't want to get hit. Uh, so that was going on. As far as now religion and slavery, this is why I truncated the standard introduction, because I wanted to talk about something interesting here. He Episcopalian, which was splitting from the Church of England. He had a lot of zeal. He was one of those guys. He was involved with some of the debates about splitting with the Church of England. Apparently, the Episcopal Church may have been um, headquartered in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So a lot of debates went on about splitting from the Church of England and stuff like that, maintaining the bishop, but recognizing geographically the power is going to be over here in the Western Hemisphere. Had a lot of zeal. Listed him as an abolitionist initially, and he's opposed to slavery. And then here's the crux. Something I want to talk about is this is interesting. He believed that the black skin. Now he's appalled at slavery. He sees hundreds of ships packed with slaves, the ones who survived. Some of these ships would have these slaves spooned, packed in tight, because you're expecting a good number of them to die off. So you just pack these bodies in tight, spooning them, means front to back, and with the guys that die, you just throw them off as you're coming across, or transporting them to your next destination. There's a whole thing about that. But so he believed that the black pigment on uh, these black people, what was a form of leprosy, an illness, a skin disease, and so he set out, obviously unsuccessfully, to cure that. Um, that's a disturbing discovery of a guy he's fellowshipping with the signers of the Declaration of Independence, and it just it's one of those revelations of the mind of these men. The myths and stuff that surround these black folks that are apparently docile, passive. Now here's a prominent physician. He's educating on chemistry. He's um, obviously respected in medical circles, and he's going to write papers about the the skin pigment being an illness on black folks. Now, today we know it's melanin and it's different levels that make the skin darker and stuff. It's a reaction to sunlight and things like that. Geographically, it really makes sense, you know. Uh, we know that today, right? Hindsight being 2020. But you know, had an abbreviated introduction today because I mean, this is just one of the many myths about black folks that prevail and go forth that are circulated uh, to, in some ways, ease the conscience of the white oppressor in those days. You know, they forward the idea that the black men are rapists when that's not true. Rapists of white women, especially. You know that we it is a default position. They give the idea that the slave master is riding up, you know, with his white wife, and the slave men are at the carriage and need to be beaten back, you know, because of so much sexual energy in some cases. That's the myth, and that the black women are promiscuous, you know, are naturally um, just sexually active all over the place. We know that's not true because the slave master he created his own slave workforce often by laying down with these black mistresses, as black female slaves. More evidence of that is found in a lot of laws forwarded by many states about uh, making it illegal to interracially marry and stuff like that. I remember I did a paper on that very subject about sexuality and the myths, and I'm chatting online with a librarian about the myths about black men being rapists, black women being promiscuous, these myths being forwarded by white power and entitlement. And this librarian was incredulous and never heard of such a thing and all that. I don't know because we're chatting. I didn't see the face, but I'm guessing that it's a white woman. And in my experience, you know, hopefully my experience is very narrow and confined and very conservative. But in my experience, when I'm out in public, you know, around white women, there's an apprehension, there's a hesitancy, um, there's fear going on, and I firmly believe it stems from these myths placed on black people that are not so. That you know the behaviors were forwarded by white slave masters, and it's interesting that the ability of white power to turn that around and make that as though black men are doing this, that um, uh, that black women are into this, you know, behavior when it's just not so. You don't have an overwhelming record during slavery times of black men uh, even haphazardly raping white women. It's just it's so uncommon. You've got to dig hard to find. I don't even look because I know it's hard to find. You know, it's there's no overwhelming multiple public records of a standard of behaviors of black men doing this. And conversely, you don't find white women promiscuous. You find a whole lot of light-skinned brown people walking around, though, as a result of white slave masters laying down with their uh, black slave mistresses. You know, often so. You know, I wanted to camp. I want to get. I like to. I'm glad that like I found this guy with this myth that the black skin is a disease, and so he's treated like there's a white man underneath that. You know, in some ways he's kind of right. Because I mean, you strip away the skin of anyone. What are we? We're pink, and there's viscera, hearts, lungs, and it's all standard um, machinery in every human, right? Um, this is a result. Oh, anthropologists will say it's a result of just being in, that crucible where the pigmentation just becomes permanent. It's a defense against the sunlight, and somehow the white people are white because they stayed up north out of so much sunlight, stayed covered, and all that. That's kind of the story. I don't know exactly. Uh, I just like to say, the creator, the universe, evolution, whatever, has was divided between chocolate and vanilla and made every color in between. Right. But it's not as though we're not an alien. We're not a different kind of human. Is another thing I'm trying to put forward here today in the Good Doctors. Dr. Rush and his false conclusions. But that's just one of the major uh, ideas, that the myths that circulate that reinforce the oppression of blacks, enslavement of blacks. There's we're enslaving the black person because there's a deficiency, there's an abnormality, it's a mental um, problem with them. There are they're given to laziness and uncontrolled sexuality. All these myths that come out of the slavery era to prop up white superiority. It's incredible, and this is just one instance I found, stumbled upon on Wikipedia. But there's the myths about black sexuality, laziness of slaves. There's a lot of documented material falsely about black folks. Now, I will say, like today, maybe because of environmental conditioning, possibly um, passing on this kind of generational curses, you will find black people behaving poorly and badly often. But I'm talking about the source, the reinforcement, you know, lumping all of us into some big melting pot of dysfunction, um, as though we're another type of human being. We do a monthly series called Black First, and I purposely don't put in like I'm reading a big thick book, and it's got educators and people who got their black people who got their PhDs first and all. I dismiss all that because the black person doesn't lack ability. We're not a different kind of human being. We just lack opportunity because of our black skin. So with Black First, I'm looking for inventors, innovators, something that really was first, that a human did first. They just happened to be black, not that uh, some white man has blazed the trail. And oh boy, thank goodness a black man finally caught up and was able to move in that same space. That doesn't equate, because that's if I if I reinforce that a black man is able to do something that a white man's already done and mastered, that's just copying something. Let's talk about innovations. Let's talk about what's new. What one human is the first to do. So this gentleman's, Dr. Rush's, Benjamin Rush, uh, his myth about leprosy, we know it's not right today, but back then I bet you it was big stuff. I bet you he did experiments, probably did painful experiments on individuals. Oh, let's tear it off. Maybe it just needs to heal. I finally got rid of this stubborn wart. Wait, I got my finger back, I feel like, but I had to cut it. I had to keep cutting it, and buying chemicals, and it was painful. Just this little space. Well, what's he doing to the skin of an individual? Even though he was an abolitionist, he did own one slave. The abolitionist society frowned on it, but he was still accepted. No big surprise there. He's a prominent white man with a lot of degrees and alphabet soup behind his name, able to stand and look George Washington in the political eye, so to speak, and disagree with some of George Washington's policy. We done flew by. I'm a little over, but thanks for sticking with me. We'll get back on track of finding some interesting things here. We're almost wrapped up here. We'll do a nice summary and conclusion later on. I'm Tom Linton's Nyback. That's 365 days towards racial change. Day 112 out of the way. We're just moving right along. I'll see you tomorrow.